Logicworks is a premier partner of AWS and a gold Microsoft partner. So we do a lot of both. Today's talk is going to be primarily on AWS, but like I said, we can do both. Sorry, Google buddy, maybe in a couple years. Yeah, I'm going to talk just to you. Yeah. So, who's already in the cloud? You're in AWS. Trevor, I talked to already. He's in 365. What about you, sir?
AWS.
You work for AWS?
Yes, I do.
Oh, okay. What about you, sir?
Not on the cloud.
Not on the cloud. Who do you work with?
Galveston Housing Authority in Galveston.
Okay. Galveston Housing Authority.
Public housing.
Okay. Do you have compliance regulations for the housing authority?
No.
No? You're not storing any personal information?
One's personal is all public information, anybody or ours ask for information.
Got it. Got it.
I mean,
Okay.
granted, not social security numbers and stuff like that.
Got it. What about you, sir? You in the cloud?
I try to stay away from the cloud.
Why?
It's too nebulous.
Yeah, that is true. It could rain on you at any time.
Unfortunately, we're being forced that direction. So that's
Unfortunately?
unfortunately.
Well, hopefully.
See, I'm one of those 70% on-prem.
All right, let's talk about this for a second.
I'd rather hybrid than all in the cloud, but.
Let's talk about
Only
this.
against many.
Why? Why don't you want to move to the cloud?
Well, most of it has to do with applications. But I don't have applications I can put in the cloud.
Ah, okay.
For me, it has to be with cost control. I mean, if everything is on the cloud, they control everything. I don't have power over anything. If I want my data back, they will sure charge me for that.
There is that also.
There is that. You're not wrong. There are data
No,
transfer
it's
charges.
not.
Yeah.
They don't listen.
We've got to talk more at lunch.
Yeah, we're gonna have some long conversations. Okay, Trevor's got a question or a point. Let's go, Trevor.
So what is the number one reason that organizations do not want to move to the cloud? The number one.
Ben, did you plant him?
I didn't, but I wish I did.
We have Ben Friedman, ladies and gentlemen, in the back. Give it up for Ben Friedman. He's Logicworks South and Southeast sales rep. We also should have done the app modernization one. I think that would have been better. So what is the number one reason why customers don't want to move to the cloud? Well, I'll tell you that there isn't a number one, but there are a top three that are tied,
Okay.
right? Number one would be probably security
Okay,
concerns.
that's number one,
Right.
actually, go ahead.
They say, similarly to what you just said, if I don't own my data, if somebody else owns my data, how can I know that that's secure, right? Or it's such a big surface, attack surface, how am I going to make sure that everything is secure, right? So that's one. Number two is probably applications. Legacy monolithic applications can't run in the cloud, right? Oh, or maybe I'm running a mainframe application or something and it's not ready to go. And then three, I would say, is probably, to be quite honest, malaise. People that are used to what they're doing in the past and they're not ready to move to the new world, right?
I was gonna put that as number one.
Yeah. All right. Well, we got that as number.
Those are why people think they can.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
There's a big caveat there.
Took the words right out of my mouth.
We've done this before, if you can't tell, but it's why people think they can't move to the cloud. We, our company by ourselves, we were a boutique managed hosting company in New York for many, many years. We started founded the company in '92, and we became Logicworks in 2001.
Talking to the mic.
We were a family. I don't need to talk.
There are people online.
Do
you want leads or
I'm
not?
sorry. We were a boutique managed hosting company, but we only did companies that either needed high availability or high security, or usually both. So we did a lot of SaaS. We like customers that have customers and SLAs that they have to answer to. So we did nothing but HIPAA and PCI and PII work. That's all we did. We built these big private infrastructures, these large private clouds based on some of our own homegrown stuff and some VMware. And when the cloud came along, we were a managed hosting shop, like the plethora of ones down here, like Rackspace, CyrusOne, and DataBox, all the ones that are in use. So we saw the cloud for what it was, the ability to get out of the data center, but still do what we do. And we had to convince all these HIPAA and high trust and PCI and PII clients that the cloud was not only inherently safer, it was easier for us to, we believe that compliance is a byproduct of a good security posture. Don't measure towards the mandate, measure towards not getting breached. And then everything kind of meets in the middle. So we were able to convince 250 clients that, we can do this better in Azure and AWS. Pick your poison and we'll help you get there. And a lot of them did have these older monolithic applications that, were all intertwined. You migrate one thing and 10 things break. So there are companies like ours that help shepherd along the way and kind of break these things apart as we go. And that's, exactly what Donovan's going to talk about. One of the tools in AWS that has it, but Azure has a like tool, and so does Google. For costing, most of the cloud platforms actively try to reduce their monthly run rate for you every year. AWS, Google, and Azure all lower their costs every year. And then there's ways but that is a full-time job. An architecture like yours that's large, keeping cost control, somebody has to do that. There's tooling like Cloud Health Technology and Cloud Checker and all these great third-party applications, but they in turn cost money. And then you need somebody to run it. And that's a full-time job. And that's where companies like ours help out with that, because it's one of the things we do for our clients.
Yeah, give it up for Ben Friedman. So as we started to say before, these are perceptions, right? I would not say that these are reasons why you shouldn't. Please, I encourage everyone to check out on YouTube, or if you're a Bright Talk customer, I've done a couple presentations on app modernization and how modernizing your applications help facilitate these migrations to the cloud, right? And it gets rid of some of these concerns. But in that talk, I give an analogy that I heard at actually a Microsoft training thing, which is we need to think of the cloud and our traditional on-prem data center orchestration as two completely different things, right? We have a fortress, which is our on-prem data center world, and then we have a city, which is the public cloud. And the fortress is what we've known for a long time, and we own it, right? You own this fortress. You do whatever you want with this fortress. If you want giant anti-flight turrets on top, you could put that. If you wanted a moat around your fortress with crocodiles that are going to eat anything that comes by, you could build that around your fortress because it's yours. You own this property, and it's whatever you want it to be, right? In the cloud, it's not so much that, because it's owned by somebody else. These fine gentlemen over here, right? Well, maybe they're overlords, but not them. But because of that, it's a city, right? There's millions of people there. You can't control who comes in and who comes out. It's public by default, right? There's gonna be crime. Things are gonna happen, right? You know that some places are a little bit more attacked than some other places. So you can't manage it the same way that you would manage a fortress, but that doesn't mean that it's not possible to be as secure or well-maintained, right? That just means that you need to approach it in a different capacity. I know that there's gonna be crime on Martin Luther King Boulevard, so I'm gonna actually pre-deploy some agents there. I'm gonna deploy some monitoring resources. I'm gonna have a CCTV camera on every corner so that I can see what's going on, right? I need better monitoring, better alerting, better tooling, and better automation, basically, around the entire thing because of these constraints, right? And once you put all of those things in place, you'd actually realize that you can actually be more flexible, more agile, more secure, believe it or not, more secure in one of these public cloud platforms. Security is, say that again?
And much more expensive.
Potentially.
People can only raise so much money.
Potentially, it depends on how you deploy, right? If I deploy exactly what I'm deploying in my fortress, in my city, yeah, it will definitely be more expensive. Because you don't want to do that. You need to think of them in completely different worlds, right? I need to re-platform into the public cloud native services, right? I can't build my giant monolithic databases and my giant monolithic applications on the same virtual machine that I bought 10 years ago on this thing that's now depreciated and it's not costing me any dollars in my fortress. I'm going to be paying monthly rent on this VM, right? Yeah. So what do? You decouple it and you run microservices and you run serverless applications so that you're actually paying like $20 a month for something that's way better, way faster, more performant in the cloud, right? So it depends on how you deploy it and how your workloads are, right? Maybe some workloads just aren't a fit, and that's true as well. That's where we get to the hybrid conversation, right? Some things like an AIX or an IBMI or something like that might want to stay. There's tons of partners out there that do a hybrid cloud offering for those kinds of things, but I think it is undeniable that some workloads are just best run on the cloud. Anyway, with the 5 minutes that I have left. Multi-cloud target. So if you're looking to migrate to the cloud, if you're looking to do anything in life, you want to build on a strong foundation, right? You want to build a house, you want to build a building, you want to build a life, a family, right? We're getting deep, guys. It needs to be built on a strong foundation. And in the cloud, that foundation is really your account and networking architecture, right? And different cloud providers have different ways to manage these account and networking architectures. And it's been evolving for quite some time. Control tower is relatively new. Landing zone is relatively new. For a long time, it was like, here's one account, and then you build your VPCs and whatever that is, right? But as the industry started to evolve, we started realizing that there are benefits to scaling these out into multi-account structures, multi-VPC, multi-regional architectures. But it's kind of hard to do that without automation, because now I have all these accounts and all these VPCs and all these networks running around, and I don't have a way to manage them at scale, how to govern them with an overarching kind of way to manage it. I don't know. So today I'm going to talk about how to manage those architectures in AWS, leveraging something called Control Tower. But first, I'll talk about why you need something like this. So as you can see here, as you have a bunch of different teams, they all have different access requirements. I think some of these checks and X's got mixed up, but you don't want the client portal team, your app development team, to have the same requirements or same permissions as your accounting team, right? Do you want your accounting team to go and deploy resources in AWS? No, there you go. Because it's going to be expensive, because they're just going to spin things up. They don't know what they're doing, right? Or they'll lose their keys and it'll be really bad. So everybody has different requirements. Every team has different requirements. And so the way we manage that in AWS is by these little keys here called IAM Roles, users, groups, right? Accounting up here has access to the accounting software. That's the Cost Explorer or Cloud Health or something like that, as we mentioned. And then the web application team has access to the web application network. The client portal team has access to the client portal network. And the compliance team just has read-only access to each to make sure that everything is properly deployed, right? Now you'll notice a few things here. There's 6 subnets across 3 availability zones. That's 3 public subnets, 3 private subnets. And these are just a couple of web servers, right? No distinction of production, no distinction of which application it is, right? What happens if you have multiple SDLC tiers? What if I have dev, stage, QA, UAT, right? Testing, user testing. It's going to be really tough, because now I've got my dev resources in the same VPC as my prod. And if I deploy multiple VPCs, there are going to be limits, and that also causes sprawl. It's going to be impossible to manage 100 different VPCs. I'm going to hit these limits, and I need to tag everything. It's going to be crazy, 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 really hard to manage. So let's break it out into different accounts, right? We have a client portal account that has 3 different VPCs, one for prod, one for stage, one for dev. For those of you who don't know, a VPC is a virtual private cloud. It's a logical grouping, a logical separation within the cloud, within AWS, to designate certain resources to be a part of its own network, right? It's your own virtual private data center. You could also segment them by different business needs, right? Logicworks, as we had mentioned before, we're a cloud services provider. We work with hyper-compliant customers, the HIPAA, PCI, high trust SOC customers who have 100% uptime, mission critical requirements. They have a ton of customers on the back end that require them to be HIPAA, things like this, right? Or PCI. And when you go through these audits, they become very expensive and also lead to sprawl because it's like, well, do I have data there? I don't know. And then the entire thing is in scope for the audit, costing you thousands and thousands of dollars. Instead, you can just say all of my PCI stuff is going to go on one account. And then all my non-PCI stuff is going to go in a different account. Can you do that in a data center? No. So just to reiterate, why multiple accounts? It gives you better isolation, better administrative isolation between SDLC tiers, between different workloads, minimizes your blast radius, limits your audit scope, things like that, right? Enter control tower, as I mentioned before. It's a good idea to deploy these things as multiple accounts. In AWS, it's multiple accounts. In Azure, it's subscriptions under a tenant, right? In AWS, what is it in Google?
The security command center.
Security command center. What are the accounts called?
Oh, well, so Google is structured a little differently. We have an organization, and within the organization, you can have multiple projects and folders and things.
Got it.
And then the permissions can cascade down through those. So there isn't a need to have multiple accounts in Google because you can provide that level of isolation within
The
individual
project
projects.
and or the,
Yeah, and since VPCs are global, you can define those, and regardless of where resources are deployed, those permissions kind of follow them.
Got it, got it. So this is basically building that kind of structure within the AWS world, right? It has that top level AWS organization that we were talking about just now, right? But basically what Control Tower does is it deploys a prescriptive, just gotta make sure I'm on time, a prescriptive secure baseline, that foundation for a multi-account structure. And by default, it deploys 4 different accounts, right? We'll get into those in a little bit. It's a great place to start your AWS migration if you're looking to move, if you're just starting out and you want to make sure that things can be secure and maintained and governed, you build it. Or if you're already in the cloud and you maybe migrated 5 years ago and there's a lot of sprawl and tech debt and you did it in a rush because we're just trying to get up and out of the data center, you retrospectively look back and you're like, okay, let me refit this stuff into a control tower so I can have some of these governance and security policies in place, right? It leverages automation, so it's by default, by nature, allows for expansion over time. It allows you to segment all of these workloads into these different accounts, as I was mentioning before. And it can limit your threat exposure by minimizing your footprints into single accounts, right? I can have dev in a dev account. If somebody gets access to my dev account, knock on wood, I don't have a breach. But if somebody somehow gets access to my dev account, they're not seeing my prod data, right? They're not seeing my PHI, my PCI, whatever data is stored in prod. And I could just blow away that entire dev account because it's deployed by automation and I can just spin it right back up, right? It's brilliant. I mentioned landing zone before. There was something called AWS landing zone a few years ago. It still exists, but is slowly working its way out. It's being deprecated, but basically Control Tower is the platform as a service version of landing zone, right? Landing zone was a giant pipeline of CloudFormation templates that you could manually deploy and change and configure yourself. It was groundbreaking when it came out, but then a few years later, it was like, wow, this is hard to manage. So Control Tower. Now I mentioned the overall core 4 account structure that it deploys by default. The top level domain is the organizational structure, right? So there's this the master organization account that you're not supposed to deploy any workloads in, but it manages all the automation and the business logic for your control tower, right? Under that, we have 3 different core accounts. I don't know why I pointed at the screen. Shared services, logging, and security, right? So let's talk about security for a second. You said number 1 is security, right? Number 1 thing we need to monitor when we're talking about security is audit logging, right? Who did what, where, how, when, right? If you're not in a centralized control tower and a multi-account structure, you can have 100 different CloudTrail logs, which are those audit logs in AWS, that are all to different S3 buckets. It's really all over the place. Control Tower centralizes these all by default in this central logging account, right? Then it also centralizes something called config, because I don't just want to know who made a change and what the change was. I also want to know what else that affected, what that means in reality. So, okay, so somebody deleted this EC2 instance. What does that mean? It means that that EC2 instance was part of this VPC, part of this network, this subnet, and it was connected to these things, and it actually had this blast radius by deleting that one EC2 instance, right? So all of that stuff gets centralized into this logging account. If you have security tools, if you have a Palo Alto or something like that, if you have a virtual appliance, all those things can go on the security account. And then your shared services account, if you have Bastion hosts, or let's say the Atlassian suite, you have Jira or Confluence or something like that, you can put those in your shared services account, and it can be shared across all of your resources, right? So it's really nice. This is built by default. Again, you don't have to do any manual creation. It just does this by clicking a few buttons in the AWS console to give you that well-defined baseline of a foundation. You can also define other types of core accounts. We usually recommend deploying a networking account, back to that Palo Alto. If I want to centralize my egress or centralize my NAT through a single default route, I can put a transit gateway in place. I can put it all in the networking account, so I know I don't have to jump through 4 different accounts to get to what I'm actually trying to get to. I want to work on networking stuff, I go to the networking account. So, Victor, how much time I got left? Just a couple minutes. All right. So some use cases. A large bank. You guys heard of it before, right? We work with these compliant customers, so we got to redact all their names and stuff. But basically, the story is always the same, right? For those of you in large businesses, you've got a very large enterprise. Different teams have different requirements, different permissions. They have different coding standards, different infrastructure standards, and they will all want to manage it the same way that they did in the old world if they move to the cloud. And they're like, well, I don't do the same thing as that business unit. And if you move us all into one organization, then we're going to clash, right? So Control Tower allows us to do that, right? We can have different business units and different organizational units in AWS. This customer also had hundreds of different regulatory environments, those PCI and SOC that I was mentioning before. Each one of them had different subsets. So maybe 2 business units over here had PCI requirements, 2 over here had high trust, 1 over there had SOC, right? Again, we can dictate which account and which organizational unit is going to have which compliance scope. So this is just a really zoomed out version of just one small subset of the diagram of what's deployed, but you can see a couple direct connects into this central networking account that we have here. There are a couple Cisco CSR routers in the middle. That allows us to route all of our traffic through in a central route rather than having to deploy one in each VPC in each account. Centralizes it so we can have a hub and spoke model here. And then you can see the shared services account has a bunch of those tools, like I mentioned, the Bastion host. The shared applications account has Jira, Confluence, a database. And then that logging account has centralized S3 buckets, right? Next, we had a multi-billion-dollar asset management firm. They wanted to segment their environments based on these regulation requirements, right? So what we did was all of the regulated data was going into a production regulated, production non-regulated, non-production regulated, non-production non-regulated. Say that 5 times fast. They also needed to scale because they had a ton of different business units that were coming on after we built this first one, right? So they were able to use the account vending machine or the account factory function of this Control Tower tool to build out new accounts at scale with just push button deployments, right? I'm not going to talk about that diagram for the sake of time, but this account factory looks like this. So there's that master account that has all this automation that we're talking about. It leverages AWS Service Catalog, Lambda, AWS CloudFormation stack sets, which are infrastructure as code tools for you to deploy your resources at scale with the infrastructure as code. And then the AWS organizations, right? So every time, if I built the template account, I can say, I want this account to have 3 VPCs, 6 subnets in each VPC, 3 availability zones in each VPC. Each one is going to have these CIDR ranges, blah, 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 dictate all of that stuff. I'm going to have certain guardrails in place, says everything has to be encrypted by default, everything encrypted in rest and transit, all that stuff. And then by the time I click that button, the account that gets deployed has all these guardrails in place and the infrastructure already deployed. You don't have to worry about configuring or manually or logging in or doing any of that stuff. We heard earlier by Terrence, actually, every time you have a person log in and make a change, there's a percentage increase in the amount of risk that you are accepting with that, right? So leverage the automation to do it for you. Also, Control Tower is perfect for a software as a solution service. As Ben was mentioning, that's a lot of our customers. If you have a single tenant model, for example, and every customer gets a new stack, right? You can deploy with this push button deployment. I say I need a new production stack. Okay, great. Click. This one's for the new customer. The entire environment's deployed. All the guardrails are deployed. The infrastructure is deployed. The EC2 instances, the databases, it's all there. So you can just roll these out as you need them and severely decrease your time to market. Finally, visibility in billing, right? Rather than having to have all these crazy defined tagging strategies, which you still will need, but they will be much less complex because now I'm orchestrating everything in separate accounts. So if I have my production account and an AWS account 5, I'm like, oh, how much is our prod costing us? $400. If there's not this, you need to have some sophisticated chargeback function. And you're like, oh, well, this client's costing this much, this part of the database, right? Now I know this whole client is in the account. So everything that this client uses, we're going to bill back to this account, right? Great. So to summarize, Control Tower is a great solution for complex regulated deployments. It builds you that beautiful foundation of guardrails and governance. We want to leverage automation as much as possible because automation and templates is way better than manual work, decreasing that human risk and human error. But also you need to carefully think about, is Control Tower right for me? Are we doing a multi-account structure? Because if I only have 2 EC2 instances, there's no reason to build out this giant foundation and automation tool if I have 2 things in my application, right? So save yourself some time, save yourself some effort, whatever the best solution is for you. A little bit about Logicworks and myself. My name is Donovan Brady. I'm the Director of Solutions Architecture at Logicworks. We are a leader in cloud professional and managed services. We're a leader in the Gartner Magic Quadrant for both of those. And if you need help building an AWS Control Tower, migrating or optimizing your environments, give us a call. Thank you.